Okay, lesson 8. We're going to talk about reinforcement and some value-added education as well. Okay? So, the first thing that we need to do is acquire the discrimination of some important technical concepts and terms and operations. A reinforcer. This is the stimulus. This is the thing that follows behavior. The reinforcer. It's the stimulus, the thing, the event, the condition that follows the behavior. And it's going to cause that behavior to increase in frequency and future likelihood. The reinforcer. Okay? If that event that follows the behavior does not produce an increase in the frequency of responding, then that thing, event, or condition is not a reinforcer. Reinforcers are defined by their effect, meaning the behavior increases in frequency. Okay? So a behavior occurs, it's followed by an event, the frequency of that behavior increases. Then that event is a reinforcer. If I tell someone to go do something and they start increasing the thing that I told them to do, is there a reinforcer involved? No, because the telling did not follow the behavior. The telling occurred before the behavior. So the telling ain't a reinforcer. Okay? It would be called, in Miller's language, an unknown. We don't know what is causing that change in behavior because we haven't studied it yet. Okay? All right, let's talk about contingency. This is absolutely critical that you master this concept, this scientific principle of a contingency. A contingency is a dependent relationship between two or more events. A contingency, a dependent relationship between two or more events. Okay? Let's do an everyday example with some assumptions. We're going to have our first assumption be your car is started. The engine is running, which means that you have gasoline in the gas tank. Second assumption. We're going to make a third assumption, that your transmission works. Fourth assumption is when you shift it into drive. The contingency is when you step on the gas pedal, then the car moves forward. That's a contingency between two events. Gas pedal is depressed and the car moves forward. A relationship between two events. Another way to talk about a contingency is an if-then relationship. An if-then relationship. If you step on the gas pedal, the car will move, given those conditions and assumptions that we just had. Okay? All righty, contingency. Reinforcement, and students make an error in the discrimination of reinforcer and reinforcement. Reinforcement is the process. Reinforcement is the process that results in an increase in the frequency of responding. So let's look at reinforcement. The immediate response contingent presentation of a reinforcer that increases the frequency of that response. If you have reinforcement, you must have a reinforcer. But it's the process. The reinforcer is presented immediately following the behavior, and if the behavior increases, then we have reinforcement. The strengthening of the behavior, increasing the future likelihood of that behavior, and the immediate increase in the frequency of responding. Reinforcement. Okay? Any questions about the big three here? All right. What's in a name? What's in a name? Reinforcer versus reward. This is really important. Okay? Reinforcers increase the frequency of responding. What about a reward? If I give you a reward, it's likely that you will experience pleasure. If I gave you $100 right now, would you feel some pleasure? Yeah. But would it produce any increase in the frequency of her behavior? That's the question. Was the reward given following a behavior? That's the contingency. And did the behavior increase in frequency? That's the effect. Rewards are related to pleasure, but they don't necessarily increase the frequency of responding. Okay, here's another example. Let's say that I called in a tip to the FBI regarding some criminal, and there's a $50,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of this criminal. And I call in the tip, and they grab the guy. And I get the $50,000 reward. Am I happy? I have a lot of pleasure. Is my behavior reinforced? That would be an unknown. What would you need to observe me doing to say that the $50,000 was a reinforcer?
Like you doing it again?
Doing what again?
Calling in another criminal?
Calling in tips to the cops. That's the behavior that would have to increase if the $50,000 was a reinforcer. But I don't do that. So what do we know about the $50,000?
Is it a reward?
It's just a reward. It's just a reward. Okay? If we want to increase behavior, we've got to have a reinforcer. We must have a reinforcer. Can a reward be a reinforcer? Sure it can. Absolutely. And there's our fill-in-the-blank question. That almost looks like a quiz question, doesn't it? Can a reward be a reinforcer? Yes, but only if following the presentation of the reward, there is a blank, fill in the blank, tell me, increase in the frequency of behavior. Bingo. 2 points on the next quiz. So yes, they can be, but they are not the same. And be careful. Don't get caught in the trap of rewarding behavior and there's no increase and you question why. And say, this stuff doesn't work. It does work. You have to do it appropriately. How about bribery versus reinforcement? Okay? This is common. People confuse this all the time. And this is unfortunate. This is sad. We can use reinforcers and reinforcement to increase the quality of life of many people by teaching them important skills and behaviors so they function more effectively. So let's look at bribery. Bribery is giving a reinforcer, that's a typo, I'm going to fix this on the fly. Whoa, happened to my, ink there? No? Oh,
You gotta put your slideshow back on.
I gotta put my slideshow back up. All right, good thing we have somebody that knows what they're doing. You mean just open it up again?
I think so.
No, something goofy. Where's Tina when we need her? Would you check, Cody, please? 'Cause I'm not sure what happened to our HDMI. It just suddenly changed. Here's the switch over here, isn't it? It's on two. Was it on two previously?
We'll go get
We're on two. She who knows everything. So let's talk about a bribery anyway. And we'll get it back up. So bribery is when we give a reinforcer to a person before the occurrence of the behavior. The reinforcer is given before the occurrence of a behavior for the performance of an illegal or immoral act. So there are two important points here, aren't there? The reinforcer is given before the behavior occurs, and the behavior itself is illegal or immoral. That's bribery, and we've got further weirdness. Okay?
It just quit.
Give me an example of bribery.
Hiring a hitman.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about when that reinforcer is presented, before or after.
Before.
The hitman is going to say, you got to give me cash now before I do the hit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the hit is the killing action.
Yes.
So I give you $50,000 to take out my ex-wife. Right?
All right.
He does it, and she's dead. He commits the action of killing, that's the behavior, but he also has the reinforcer before he performs that behavior. Now, here's the tough question, right? Is killing my ex-wife illegal?
Yes.
Is it immoral?
Yes.
A little bit. Okay? That's a good example of bribery. Can we have another example? This is Tina, by the way.
Yeah, I'm Tina.
Yes.
Wait, what about bribing kids to do something?
Yeah. Just went blank. I don't know. Fire it up again. And there it is. It says HDMI 1, but we're on HDMI 2. And we were operating fine.
My foot's asleep.
Yep.
That's better.
How many PhDs does it take to fix the projector?
There's no number that will work.
There's no number. I like it. It's an infinity.
She got me. Sissy, read that for me. Don't read that,
Those are people on this be like, what is this?
No. I know where you live, okay? You live in that one. Fourth floor.
Is that right?
Stop!
That he's right?
I know, like his pain was like
We'll just continue on.
You could. I probably already know it.
You know what building it is. But you don't know what
Sorry.
Hey, we got the whole thing on video.
Yeah, we do. We got the whole thing on video. All right. Okay, let's continue on with this important discrimination of bribery versus reinforcement. Okay? So we had a good example, and you had another observation to share with us, is that right?
Oh, I was asking, like, what about, is it still bribing if you're, like, bribing a kid to do something good?
Okay, let's analyze that carefully, because this is the common question. Okay? Now, I want you to repeat that question a little bit louder, please.
Is it still bribing if you're bribing them to do something good?
Okay, let's pause. Do something good. Let's look at our definition of bribery. Is doing something good illegal? Is it immoral? So what is the problem with this language that he's using?
It doesn't match the definition.
Pardon?
It doesn't match the definition.
Doesn't match the definition, number one, absolutely. If you have I'm going to interpret here. If you're saying this kid is doing something good, you want this kid to do something good, that's a desired behavior, right? And now you want to increase that desired behavior. Can we have the lights, please? Thanks. So if we want to increase desired behavior, what must we do? We've got to reinforce that behavior. When does a reinforcer occur? After the behavior. So is that bribery? No. But this is the common, everyday person, pop psychology, psychobabble, incorrectness in the analysis of behavior and principles of behavior. We use reinforcement to increase desired behavior. It's the only time we want to use it, unless in the natural contingencies, and they're out there, folks, the natural contingencies shape undesired behavior. We see that all the time, don't we? A classic example that you're familiar with is cheating. The natural contingencies of the classroom shape cheating behavior. You cheat, you get the right answer, correct? It ain't bribery. It's reinforcement of an undesired behavior, just like desired behavior. So let's take a peek here. This one is a little bit, unfortunately we can't read it, but we had a good example. Let's talk about false morality, okay? False morality, because that example isn't bribery if I try to increase some desired behavior, okay? False morality. This is the belief. This is self-talk, also known as thinking. This is the belief that a person shoulda, oughta, wanna do the behavior without reinforcement. False morality. The person, the kid, shoulda, oughta, wanna do that desired behavior without reinforcement. This is false morality. How many of you work part-time or full-time? About 25% or so, 20%, okay? Now let's apply false morality to those who raise their hand. You work, right? What's the delayed reinforcer for your working behavior? Money, paycheck. Now, let's analyze this. Shouldn't you oughta, wanna work anyway without monetary reinforcement? Why? What's wrong with you? Give me the telephone number of your boss, and I'm going to call him and say, she just told me you don't have to pay her. She wants to do this anyway without anything. Right? That's false morality. Being paid for work behavior is a contingency. It's not the most effective one, but it's there. So saying that this kid shoulda, oughta, wanna do it anyway without any reinforcer following that desired behavior just doesn't make sense. Okay? False morality versus reinforcement. Alrighty. And this is problematic. This is going to force me to go to chalk and talk.
Wow,
That's scary. That's really scary. I haven't done this for years. I don't know how to do it. We're going to talk about the reinforcement contingency. Okay? The reinforcement contingency. Okay? Now, before we get into the reinforcement contingency, I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about the dead man's test. It ain't in the book. That's too bad. This is a mistake from my view. The dead man's test. This will help you a whole lot as you go forward. The dead man's test is this. If a dead man can do it, it ain't behavior. If a dead man can do it, it ain't behavior. If a dead man cannot do it, then it most likely is a behavior. Okay? You're talking about an action being performed. So apply the dead man's test when you look at examples in the book and in class and stuff that we talk about. Okay? Now, the other thing to help you on activities in the future and in the book. Right now we've got 4 rules. These are my rules. They're not Miller's rules. So these are my rules. Okay? Number 1 rule. You get an example. The first question you ask is, whose behavior are we analyzing? Whose behavior are we analyzing? Because it can get confusing really fast. Okay? Second question you ask is, what is the behavior? What behavior are we analyzing? You got to be precise. You got to pinpoint it. There's a lot going on. Whose behavior? What behavior? Third question. What event followed the behavior and increased the frequency of responding? What event followed the behavior and increased the frequency of responding? So now we're talking about the contingency. There's the behavior, what event followed. If the behavior occurred, then what happened? And we're talking about, in reinforcement, we're presenting an event. What event was presented? The next rule, which is also a question, is what is in the before condition? Okay? So let's look at an example here. This ain't in the book as well. Okay? So whose behavior? With my dead marker. Oh, it's a bank shot. And it went right to you. That was the plan. We're going to put our rat named Eno in the chamber. Okay? So we know whose behavior we're analyzing. What behavior? Okay. Lever press. And I'll draw a little operative chamber, also known as an experimental chamber, also known as a Skinner box. Here's our rat. Okay? He's a 3-legged rat. Here's the lever right there. Okay? Down here we've got a food cup. And And up here, we've got what's called the food hopper, filled with little chunks of rat chow, sort of like Purina chow for your dog. Okay, so this is our rat, yes. Okay? So, Eno the rat is going to press the lever, and the lever toggles down. Presses it down, and then it pops back up to this position. So, we've got a lever press. We know whose behavior. We go to the third question, which is, what event followed the behavior? Okay? And what we've got going on here, contingent on the lever press, we are going to have the presentation of a reinforcer. And that specific event is the presentation of food. Okay? Now this brings us to our last rule or question. What's in the before condition? Now this is where it gets critical to understand the contingency. When is the reinforcer presented? After the behavior and contingent on the lever press. Eno the rat's got to press the lever. Then the reinforcer is presented. So, what's happening before the lever press? No reinforcer presented, because the reinforcer is only presented contingent on the behavior. Now, if food is a reinforcer for Eno, what's going to happen to his lever pressing behavior? It's going to increase in frequency and be more likely to occur in the future, which is kind of like what you said, continue. Okay? But more precisely, it's going to be more likely to occur in the future. Okay? This is our reinforcement contingency, with the 4 rules to help you do it, and the dead man's test. Okay? Let's do another one that's somewhere hidden in the slide presentation. Good prompting behavior. All right, this is, let's go back here to our rules, right? And I'll put them all up here. So whose behavior? Your behavior. Okay, we're analyzing your behavior. Okay, what behavior? We're going to go simple. Biting into a ripe apple. Biting into a ripe apple. Okay? So, here's our behavior. All right, so now we're analyzing the relationship between this behavior and some environmental event, and we go to our third rule. What event followed the behavior of biting into a ripe apple? And I'm going to insert a little prompt here. Analyze this carefully. Don't shift into 5th gear and go way forward. How many people have bitten into an apple? Raise your hand. what immediately followed that behavior of biting into the apple? Nope, you're fast forward. Yes? Can't quite hear you.
The sound?
Yeah, that's contemporaneous, contiguous with. Somebody said it? Reardon? Raridan? I only heard that name once, so I get 3 more tries, right? You'd say it again louder, please. The taste. Contingent on biting into the ripe apple, we have the presentation of the crunch, sure, and the taste, right? Let's focus on the taste. Now notice that I said a ripe apple, right? What kind of taste in a ripe apple? Can't quite hear you.
Sweet.
Sweet. We have the presentation of sweet taste. So when we do this analysis, we have to be very, very precise, very concrete, and pinpoint these events as clearly as we can. And then we'll be able to understand what's going on, how behavior is being regulated by the environment. Okay? If we have sweet taste as a reinforcer, what's going to happen to your biting behavior? Can't quite hear you.
It's going to continue.
Let's back up. What's the first thing that's going to happen? It's going to increase in frequency. And then what's going to happen? It's going to be more likely that you engage in that behavior in the future. What does that mean? You're going to bite into another apple down the road, aren't you? That's in the future. This is the power of reinforcement. Okay, now I'm going to throw a Miller question at you. We'll use somebody's handkerchief. Now we've got a bitter taste being presented contingent on biting into the apple. What's going to happen to the behavior? Maybe it's going to decrease. You're not going to bite into it anymore, for sure. Now here's the Miller question. What is causing that change in behavior? You're not biting into the apple anymore. That would be an unknown, because we haven't talked about it. But it ain't reinforcement. Reinforcement is when the behavior increases in frequency. That's how you determine that. And we have a consequence that follows that behavior. If it's something else, it ain't reinforcement. Okay? And we are pretty close to where we need to be, and I'm a little overdue. We'll let you do a couple quizzes, or at least one. Right, gentlemen?
We've got an activity.
Do we have a quiz for today too?
Yes.
Always have quizzes. What am I saying? Let's let the students here regulate the contingencies. How many people want to do an activity versus take quizzes?
Sure.
Raise your hand. Quiz!
Is it a group activity or an alone activity?
I don't know. You got one? I think you're outvoted. We got one hand.
It looks like an alone activity.
It's a solo activity. Okay, let's clarify. Quiz! Those are solo activities.
But remember, activities, this activity is not a closed book or closed note.
That's
this activity, guys. Come on.
Okay? Solo activity. Solo activity. Looks like activities went. Okay?